Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Sculpture X. My name is Lisa Austin, and I'm an artist with Civitas.design. I'm one of 35 faculty in Edinburgh University's art department, which is celebrating its 100-year anniversary this year. As the university's new Bruce Gallery director, I'm happy to report that our graduate assistant, Rachel Malley, is going to be launching the university's virtual art gallery next month with our first online faculty show. You can follow us on Instagram at brucegallery.eu. Now, 2020 is also an anniversary year for Sculpture X. We're 10 years old. And almost 10 years ago, Angie Sikora was one of the first students involved with organizing the Sculpture X. It was called speed dating at the time. She was completing her MFA here at Edinburgh, and the program is now called 8 Emerging Artists. Now, I'm just going to give you a word about diversity. As the faculty and staff who organized Sculpture X, we were from Allegheny, Chatham, Edinburgh, Seton Hill, Slippery Rock, the Sculpture Center, and Civitas. We worked really hard to build in a diverse set of speakers and panelists. But after the 8 emerging artists were identified, we realized we had failed to bring that same diversity to this particular program. I apologize for this. I have learned, and all the organizers have learned, that if you want diversity and inclusion, it must be deliberate and built into the very first step of the planning process. So we promise to do better next year in 2021. And now, Angie Sikora.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Sculpture X 8 Emerging Artists presentations. My name is Angie Sikora, and I'm joining you all from Omaha, Nebraska today. I'm an artist, arts educator, and alum of Edinburgh University, where I received my MFA in sculpture in 2013. During my time at Edinburgh, I worked as a graduate assistant under Professor Lisa Austin, helping her facilitate the Sculpture X in its very early stages. In particular, I arranged an emerging artist presentation of artists in the region as an opportunity to network beyond the small MFA community of Edinburgh University. This was an exciting opportunity to connect with other sculptors at similar stages in their careers. Not only did this event expand the network of students in the region, but it was a spark for many exciting future conversations around the state of sculpture. I'm still in touch with many of these artists today. I was asked to assist Lisa Austin in organizing this year's Emerging Artist presentations. 8 students from around the region have been personally selected by their faculty of their universities. Each of them will be sharing their work with you this afternoon. These artists include Sage Baxter, a BA of Seton Hill University in Greensburg, PA, Abigail Olive Benkovich, a BFA from the University of Pittsburgh and currently at RIT for an MFA in metals. Kimberlyn Blois, pursuing an MFA in ceramics from Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania. Riley Brown, earning a BFA at OCAD University in Toronto, Ontario. Melanie Lancetal, a BA from Chatham University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and currently pursuing an MFA at the University of Kentucky. Ella Medicus, a BFA from Alfred University in Alfred, New York. David Ross, a third-year BFA student at the Cleveland Institute of Art. And finally, Caitlin Sweetland, a BFA graduate from Slippery Rock University in Slippery Rock, PA. Each artist will be giving a 5-minute, 15-slide presentation of their work this afternoon. In between each presentation, we will have an opportunity for approximately a 1-minute Q&A, and I will select 1 or 2 questions typed in the chat from audience members. Please make sure any questions are asked in the Q&A tab below. The chat feature will be enabled for dialogue throughout the presentations. The Zoom webinar event will be recorded for future viewing purposes. I encourage any audience members to reach out to any of the emerging artists to continue conversations surrounding their work and concepts presented today. Contact information for each artist can be found on the SculptureX website. And thank you all for joining us. I am going to turn it over to Sage for our first presentation.
Hello, my name is Sage Baxter. I am an artist from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I received my BA from Seton Hill University and where Professor Patty Beachley ignited my love for welding. Originally, I was studying painting until making my transition. In 2015, towards the end of my BA schooling, I worked with a community to erect the Jennings Womack Memorial. This was my first large commission, supported by Professor Patty Beachley, and was definitely an introduction to the sculpture life. From 2014 to current day, I've been a welding mentor for Mobile Sculpture Workshop. Every summer, we work with underserved teenagers in Pittsburgh around the city. We work on fabrication, we work on teamwork, and we work on creativity. It was a wonderful experience. It's been home for a lot of students every summer. In 2016, I started a collaborative project called Stamped. Originally, it took form in a sexual assault informative video, and then led to a sculpture project with PAR, Pittsburgh Action Against Rape. This was an interactive project that toured at different universities. In 2018, I lived in rural Messejana in Portugal for a couple months in the summer for an artist residency. The goal was to create and fabricate a community sculpture, but I ended up falling madly in love with the people and learned a lot about the language, the culture, and the love. This piece itself was inspired by Lady Fatima's crown, the historical tile work that's throughout Portugal, and the beading that you often find in front of the rural market doorways. In 2016, I began a mini-series of pods. I wanted to create a shelter at the beginning of the Trump administration that seemed protective, but was also quite vulnerable. This led to a couple more pieces that occurred in 2018. 2019, I was acknowledged as Emerging Artist of the Year and had a large solo show at Pittsburgh Center for the Arts, where I was able to finally take some time to take the spaces in my life and experiment with how I can make them interactive. Throughout the show, each piece was titled with an address in my life. So each piece was recreated in a whimsical, interactive way that allowed everybody who entered the show to sit, walk, crawl, touch the pieces. You'll see a lot of repetitive lines and patterns throughout my work. It's a combination of my obsessive compulsive disorder that makes me incredibly attracted to lines and repetition. I also have an extreme fascination with gold that keeps reoccurring throughout different series. In this work, I was able to practice with textiles. Well, that was a quick skip. For this last piece, also interactive, I was thinking a lot about being an educator and making my pieces approachable for children and adults, to kind of create new experiences that were a little more imaginary. In 2019, I did an artist residency at Pittsburgh with Museum Lab and worked directly with the 6th grade classroom. We worked on safe spaces. This was a wonderful project inspired by artist Gina Guerco, who showed me how to do the pizza weaving through her YouTube videos and her art practice. I worked with the classroom to try to get to the heart of our spaces in our lives. What makes us happy, what makes us safe, what makes us comfortable, what spaces do we go to show our friends, what makes us curious. And we investigated that through paintings that turned into that large communal sculpture. During the pandemic, I didn't have access to woodshop and welding like I usually work with, so I started to work with PPE materials I was collecting from the makerspace I worked at, leftover plastic from printing face shields and from making face masks and experimenting with new material. Currently, I'm experimenting with new material again in a different dynamic that isn't with PPE material, but trying to find materials around my own home, as I know students across the world right now are struggling to have access to anything outside of the home. This has been a fun project where I get to focus on my love for gold again. All right, and Angie, I'll bring it back to you.
Great, Sage. Thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing your work. If anyone has a question, please type the question in the Q&A at this time. And if not, we will move on to the next presenter. And if there are questions that people prefer to wait and ask at the end, we will circle back around once all of the presentations have concluded for a final opportunity for Q&A. All right, well, if no one has Q&A, we'll move on. Thank you so much, Sage. Our next presenter is Abigail Olive Benkovich from the University of Pittsburgh, currently at RIT in the Metals MFA program.
So I will share my screen. Oops, to move. There we go. Okay. Hi, so I am Abigail Benkovich, and I work predominantly with metal as well as virtual and physical mixed media. Currently, I'm a graduate student at the Rochester Institute of Technology, and I use copper, brass, steel, silver, and gold in order to mix contemporary design with traditional technique. When I first learned traditional jewelry design, I pulled from the architecture that surrounded me. In this case, it was in Florence, Italy, and I made a series of pieces influenced by the details in the Duomo Santa Maria di Fiore, the church there. This is another piece from the Florence series. I used silver to frame a crushed malachite stone inlay. So I started using the architecture as the main inspiration, but then took those geometric forms to complement the organic curves of the human body. More recently, I've taken that same earring and updated it into my current style, which incorporates a minimal color palette, very angular forms, and extended lines that fit in with streetwear style. This piece uses a black marble crushed stone inlay. This is visible in my other commercial pieces, the streetwear style, predominantly working with silver and a black patina in order to let the form speak for itself. In this specific piece called To Have and To Hold, it's a small vessel to keep what's most important close to you. Working with other media like painting led me to create this collage that took inspiration from Caravaggio's Medusa and mixed it with inspiration from the fashion designer Heron Preston. This was a turning point in my journey as an artist because it was the first time I mixed Renaissance with contemporary design with a twist of horror. I took this new idea of horror and Renaissance to create a short film in which I was able to visualize feelings of hurt, shame, and depression I was experiencing at the time of my life. I started with a wearable metal sculpture and built a world around it with makeup, styling, acting, and how I edited the video. This is a still from the same video, which if you wanted to see the whole thing, I have links to my website and my Instagram posted. This adornment on the face was the first time I made something that rests under the eyes, and you'll see it is a reoccurring theme in my more recent work. Here I am commenting on how society treats women who want to speak up about abuse. I used silver wire to make a piece that goes in the mouth and has hinged hooks to keep the mouth shut, as many times people don't want to hear what women have to say. And so my work with video brought me to document this unconventional drawing. It took me 5 minutes to rip paper apart and 106 minutes to put it back together. It's a visual representation of trauma, which can happen in an instant, as well as the healing process, which takes a lot longer. Going back to the motif of jewelry on the face, I took the mythology of death coins, which are placed on the eyes as payment to get from the living world to the world of the dead. And then I mixed them with carved shells, which represent beauty and status to wear. So the mix portrays the constant pursuit of perfection. This uses the same apparatus to hold jewelry on the face as the previous piece, something I want to further explore in my time at RIT. In my work, I tend to imagine not only a piece of wearable art, but the world it would exist in. So I make the documentation of my work something that is a standalone piece. So recently, I've been keeping on the theme of adornments under the eyes. I've been playing with recognizable logos with my own twist, something that I personally would want to see in an ad campaign. Not sure why I gravitate so heavily to under the eyes yet, but it's something I want to play with in my studies. Once COVID hit, there was a stretch of time where I didn't have metal studio. So I took up batik, which is silk dyeing, and used Renaissance art as inspiration to promote wearing masks and staying inside during quarantine. As I like to call this one, the first couple to social distance. Being loud with my art on flattening the curve allowed me to find my voice to speak on social issues and to call out injustice. I figure if I have this platform, I want to speak to be an ally to people of color and LGBTQ community. And in the future, I want to keep equality and inclusion and love at the center of what I do. Well, thank you. So back to you, Angie.
Thank you, Abigail. I appreciate you sharing your work. I don't see any questions asked in the Q&A. If any audience members at this time have any questions for Abigail, please type your responses right now. Once again, there will be time after all of the presentations have been concluded for a final Q&A. All right, Abigail, thank you. We're going to continue on and move to, actually, one moment. There was one question, Abigail. Delaney Jenkins asked, how is your work changing at RIT?
That's a great question. So I'm continuing with more wearable, non-traditional art, like on the face, but currently it's using still geometric form, but repetitiveness. Like there's a project I'm working on that'll be done in like a couple weeks that I've cut out like 100 pieces and I'm soldering them together. So it's repetition and assembly. And then I'm also working with the themes of identity and perception of each other, but that doesn't mean that someone else's perception is your identity. So.
Great, thank you so much. That was a really wonderful question, and I really appreciate the audience members engaging. It certainly makes the conversation more interesting. Thanks, Abigail. We will move on to Kimberlyn Blois, pursuing an MFA in ceramics from Edinboro University of Pennsylvania. Kimberlyn, go ahead.
All right. Yeah, I'm Kimberlyn Blois. I'm in my second year as a grad student at Edinboro in ceramics. And I started my whole ceramics experience at Mercyhurst University in 2011. That's where I found ceramics. I got into making these sculptural teapots in 2014. I was exploring the movement of geometric forms through space and kind of this marriage of geometry and organic movement. And I took kind of a 5-year break after undergrad and worked on a completely different body of work. And as soon as I came back to school for grad school, I jumped right back into this geometric, organic, moving sculpture situation. So this was a large piece that I made last year. Wasn't really what I was looking for, so I started to look at other influences, sort of still leaning into that love of geometry and really looking at a lot of optical art, especially Frank Stella, thinking of how I can translate these sort of pieces into something three-dimensional. And I relate them to a topographical map, if you think of them as a more organic version of that geometric two-dimensional drawing. So they easily are translated into three-dimensional forms, almost like a telescoping of these forms. So I'm translating that into ceramic. I started working with paper clay, which is just like regular clay, except with paper pulp added into it. So when you fire it, the paper burns out. You are left with more of a porous, light material. But before you fire it, it gives it a lot of strength. So you can go very thin like this, and it just opens up a lot of possibilities for me. With this piece here, I started to notice where I could lean into the warping that I was having with this clay, propping it up with different wires. It forms around those wires a little bit, so you get this extra movement dimension. Here with this piece, I have a process shot. You can see how I start with this topographical idea and how that really lines up, and then I sort of fan it out. After this, I moved on to, trying to get away from that static base that a lot of these pieces have, trying to go in more than just one direction out. Think of it as a start and a finish, a gradual crescendo and diminuendo, if you will, and leaning into this twist a little more, different surface textures, decoration, and having things where it's like this piece up on its tips. It's this precarious situation where people are like, no, please put that down. It looks like it's gonna fall over. That's very enjoyable to me. I am dealing with construction issues, problem solving all the time. So I tried lining everything up on a threaded steel rod, which got me maybe a little bit closer to where I want it to be, but it's maybe a little too industrial and very much all geometric, not so much organic. I'm looking at a lot of motion studies right now, like Moray, Muybridge. If I look at photos like these, I'm thinking, I'm sort of turning them into topographical maps in my brain, this topography of movement and how I can stretch those out. And I'm taking my own photos now of these motion studies as well, of everyday objects in motion and how I can translate that. You see these shapes made from these movements of a tape roll and a pencil. And I am letting that influence my work more. This one is a spinning Tupperware lid that I made a template from that on the bottom left there, those are the pieces before I fire them of my one of my most recent sculptures. And I've added some lines to them to give it a little more of an optical illusion movement thing. And this is that piece and how that turned out. It's getting there. We're moving forward. I've started glazing things together instead of having props in between each layer. So it's a more seamless transition, and it's just getting better and better and closer to where I want to be.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kimberlyn. It looks like there are two different questions that attendance members would like to know. One from Teresa Antonellis. She asks, did you study Latin or adopt it as extended artist practice in naming work?
I sort of started doing the Latin titles because people kept seeing my work as sort of creatures little things like that. So I was like, okay, let's see what's the like scientific name of this creature, I guess, and going forward in that way.
And one other question, have you worked with anyone in physics as it may inform your work?
I haven't. I should. I can see how that would help a lot probably. But so far I've just done problem solving on my own.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really interesting question
Mhm.
to ponder. Great. Thanks so much, Kimberlyn. We will move on to Riley Brown. Riley is currently at OCAD University in Toronto, Ontario.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. As Angie said, I'm a visual artist from Toronto. I'm currently working on a BFA in sculpture installation from OCAD University. And yeah. So this is some recent, I'm working on, my recent work has to do with understanding basic structures derived from an innate response to form, and as well as using representation and manipulations in public space to rethink barriers of practicality. So this is a recent series of works which was inspired by forts made by children. I wanted to mimic these forts, but make them personal to me and view them from the angle of an archetypal house. So in themselves, these constructions lack the necessities of a real house, of course, but they stand as studies in the form of studies in form to represent fundamental aspects of a house. So these installations really hold a lot of truths as they point to a subconscious relationship with the world of design, because architectural references are made unknowingly or knowingly as these things are built. And materials used will range from person to person. I chose common building materials and random objects found or borrowed. Really just something that could act as a vertical or horizontal or 45-degree angle. And of course, decisions like this will lead to eventual abstraction. But that's interesting because it allows for the viewer to decide on points of fundamentality for themselves. And going into another series of works which has aspects of the first, I wanted to reinterpret the use of work and life spaces through representation and physical manipulation. And so one way of doing this was I reshaped the hill using airbeds. And the goal really not to make any sort of seamless addition to the hill, but to connect in their shared feeling of broadness of form. And as well as consider possibilities of when materials aren't so fundamentally distinguished. This is another project where I further question notions of public use, and I parked the GMC truck next to a religious cathedral and opened the doors to both, creating one space. So yeah, this caused an interesting re-examination of the roles of each space as they extended into each other. And I don't know, like I think there's great power and future in this type of temporary overriding of design intentions. So it's something I'd like to pursue. And following the same avenue, I went to the Robarts Library in Toronto, and then to affect change in the facade, I dampened the wall with water just to change how the walls are perceived. I mean, how the building is perceived. And this stemmed from combat face paint techniques where raised portions of the face and lows of the face are balanced out to deter facial pattern recognition. And it's really just about implying physical change, like yeah. So this is, wrapping it up, this is a work for Art and Agency, spearheaded by David Ross. And this is about giving shape to that which connects and separates us. And using regional materials from Toronto and Cleveland, we question what our border really means to us. Anyways, if you have any questions, you can email me. And also you can find more from that work on my at my Instagram page. That's 3 underscores. Anyways, thank you again for your time. Thank you for listening.
Great, thank you so much, Riley. Very quickly, does anyone from the audience have questions for Riley? Riley, I have a question for you, actually. I'm curious where your initial interest of barriers came from.
For barriers,
Mm-hmm.
with the last project?
The first few works that you discussed.
Can you elaborate a little more?
You had mentioned something about barriers and relating to form, right?
Oh, like barriers of practicality.
Yes. I'm curious, like, if there was something that you were observing or interested in that like sparked interest for those particular works.
Yeah, I think there's just a, thank you for the question. I like the question. There's a permanence. So I like architecture. I'm not an architect, but there's a permanence to architecture that it feels like impenetrable. And so when I want to rethink barriers of practicality in architecture, it's like giving me the ability to affect change in something so impenetrable like that. So like by parking a truck next to a church, like it's a way to temporarily throw off these design intentions that I have no business doing. But so it's powerful. It's a sense of freedom, and that's why I like it. I hope that answered your question. I don't know.
Yeah, it absolutely did answer my my question, and really is insightful in regards to your work. There's another question. I believe this comes from Lisa, loving the lack of quote unquote making here, which I'm assuming is referring to like object-based sculpture. How is it received in your university?
So far so good, I think. Yeah, it's something that I really am drawn to, the idea of de-skilling art, and so when I'm using found object and kind of constructing things that look like they took a minute to make, it frees oneself from the burden of, well, just skill. Like, I don't think you need skill to be a good artist, to be honest, but you need intention, and that's all. I don't know. Anyways, thanks, Lisa.
One last question, Riley, and then we're going to move on. Kate Medicus is questioning if you had to work with staff at the library for permission to alter the facade, and were they helpful in your work?
Yeah, thank you for the question. No, I didn't work with them. I didn't talk to them. I just went there and just did it. Um, to be honest, it's so much easier that way. And I figured I wasn't really doing anything too harmful. If anything, I was praising the building. Yeah, and I encourage other people to do the same kind of thing, same kind of guerrilla style.
Yes, absolutely. That's excellent. Thank you so much, Riley, and thank you for the questions
Thank
from
you.
the audience. We will move on to the next presenter. Melanie Lancetal is from Chatham University, or she's a BA from Chatham University and is currently pursuing an MFA at the University of Kentucky. Melanie, go ahead.
Hey, hello everyone. I'm just gonna share my screen here. Okay, so, oh wait. Okay. So, my name is Melanie Lancetal. I'm originally from Pittsburgh, PA, but currently live in Lexington, Kentucky. Like Angie said, I got a BA in Visual Arts and Art History from Chatham University. Then I moved abroad for a year as a primary school teacher, and now I'm back in the US pursuing my MFA. So here I have my artist statement. So I use my work as a means of reflecting on the intersection of traditional and contemporary culture. And I'm interested in how familiarity of traditional materials can help us recall sentimental narratives and can be used to make personal connections. So this work was from last spring. It was an installation with a crocheted blanket by my great grandmother, and then that she gave to my grandmother for her to go to college with. And I love using these objects that are steeped really in emotional value and meaning. And then I have these extra materials like this photo of me with my uncle learning about planets, and then my little sister sleeping under it to show the blanket in the supportive role. And then this email that my grandma wrote to me about how she wanted me to have that blanket after her. So in August, like I said, after I graduated, I moved to the Czech Republic. I moved to Prague. And one of those things that I was really struck by was the kinds of things people would leave on the streets, sometimes folded, sometimes in bags. Mainly I'm talking about fabric and materials that I could use to make art. Yeah, and this is a pillow you can see here in the wider view that I made. And I love making the idea of making pillows out of these discarded fabrics, these discarded items, turning them into something super intimate, kind of playing off the idea of scrap quilting and using this basket pattern, which kind of represents the idea of plenty. Yeah, so from all that quilting and nostalgia, living abroad, I started to make a lot of songs using my banjo that I brought with me, and this is posted on Bandcamp. This is an album of Appalachian folk ballads that I made and did whenever I was there abroad. So in November, a close friend and I had an exhibition in Eastern Slovakia called Distance Makes the Heart Grow Fonder. We both explored how our emotions and our need to have a sense of place, a sense of belonging, can really overload you and overwhelm you when you're away from that kind of sense of place. So this is a work that I exhibited there, just titled Home. I was exploring the ideas of fabricated memory, and through this meditative quilting, trying to come to terms with this mostly imaginary place and mostly imaginary experience, but still trying to preserve it and preserve also my gratitude for it. So in January, I was thinking about how these memories of the present moment might become in my future mind. So again, thinking about that fabricated memory. And I was kind of interested in experiencing them with the same kind of nostalgia, humor, like I did with these other ones. So I knitted this work, memory of a 30-kilometer hike. Yeah, where I forgot my water bottle. Anyway, so after January, it was March, later in the year, and that was when the pandemic hit. I didn't really have any art materials because I was in Eastern Slovakia with my boyfriend and his family, but I was making some drawings and some self-portraits that later became a zine. So this is another spread from that zine. It's published on my website if you want to see it. And it's just like a little story about being raised as a crafter. It's called Notes on Crafting, and about how that really kind of affected me in kind of these little anecdotal ways. And there's a humor there and sweetness that I really wanted to highlight. And then in August, I moved again to Kentucky to start my MFA. Now I'm developing objects about being shaped by these crafters in my life out of materials that connect the two of us. For instance, this pillow that's made from fabric that my grandma gave me, and then also a clump of my hair that she kept from whenever I was 6, my first haircut. Inside these objects are installed media players, repeating segments of interviews that I made with these women. Right now, for me, this body of work kind of meditates on a tension between distance and intimacy in familial relationships. Yeah, you can see there's a glow there. And yeah, so that's my work. Thanks for listening. If you want to get in touch with me, please do. My website is melanielancidel.weebly.com. My Instagram is melalancidel. Gmail is melalancidel@gmail.com. So yeah, thanks for listening, and I'm really glad to be part of this. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Melanie, for sharing your work. There is a question from Rachel Yurkovich, which reads, Melanie, thank you for sharing your work. I was wondering if you could share some more about how you were able to go about getting a job in Prague, and did you have to speak Czech, etc.? They expressed that they used to live in Prague in high school.
Okay. Oh, cool. That's awesome. So yeah, I actually do speak Czech. I'm not super well and not fluent, but I studied at Charles University during my undergrad. So that was really helpful because Czech Republic is not a super high English speaking country. I mean, it is in Prague, but yeah, so I did speak a good amount of Czech, but I got a job at a primary school. I got my TEFL certification, teaching English as a foreign language. And then through the TEFL certification, my school actually helped me to get a job there, but also some of the connections that I had whenever I was abroad. So yeah, move back. Prague is great.
And then there's one more additional question from Emily Stormfels, which reads, I am very much into quilting and was curious, do you prefer hand stitching or machine?
So just for me, I'm really interested in work as it connects to labor, and especially this idea of feminine and maternal labor. So I personally, all the quilts that I've made, especially for the things that I work on for my own work, I always hand quilt. Because it is really laborious, and you can really see you can so see the work because it's so imperfect whenever you hand quilt. But yeah, and I think I made one quilt when I was 17 that was with a sewing machine, but also unless you have a really, really good sewing machine, it like destroys your sewing machine. So that's another reason why I don't really do it on the machine.
Great, thank you, Melanie. I appreciate the questions that were asked. We will move on to Ella Medicus, who has the BFA from Alfred University in Alfred, New York. Ella, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Angie. I'll share my screen now. My name is Ella Medicus. I graduated from Alfred University in New York State in 2015. And in my work, I'm really interested in how the expanding digital world can cross over to the physical world, and how that can be layered and can become kind of confusing about like, what's your reality? And one way that this manifests in my work is this piece. On the left is a 3D object file that I found online, and then built a paper form in the physical in the middle, you can see, and on the right, I projected the 3D file onto the form. And it's really like, it captured my attention because it's this like generalization of a historical object. It's like a super rough translation that's kind of like a mockery of the traditional vessel if from a historian's perspective. It's not really depicting like one vase in particular, it's lumping all the vessels into one, and it's existing in this weird pocket online as this random low quality object file. And then the final product of this piece is actually a video. So it went through a transformation of forms. It started as the digital, and then the physical paper. And then this is the final video where you can see the projection is trying to like match up with the vase paper that I made, and it will never match up because both of them are so imperfect that it's constantly going to be in this eternity of rotating. And then another way that this is like kind of similar to that piece because of this rotating movement, but it's super different because this is a very physical piece. It's rolling around in your space. You have to kind of be careful not to step on it. It might roll into you. And it was really anthropomorphized by the viewers. People would say like, oh, it likes me, or it doesn't like me if it's rolling away from them. But it's literally just a motor in a bag. Like there's no AI controlling it, but there becomes this mystery when you look at something and you don't know exactly what's happening there. This is not my sculpture. This is a bag I saw blowing around on the street. So next time you go to a grocery store, use a reusable bag. But I see a lot of things in my surroundings, and they influence like the materials that I use. They become like actual like mediums, the things that I see around me. And another thing I see around me a lot of times are vending machines. So I had this show last year at the Sculpture Center in Cleveland, and I used a vending machine as my medium. It was functional, and viewers could purchase the items out from the vending machine. And I stocked it with prints of snacks and chips, and they were backed with wood. Some of the images you might be able to tell in this one, they're black and white. Some of them have watermarks because I just kind of grabbed them directly from the screen. So it's kind of like as if they were grabbed right off the screen, and then it's like dispensing out into your hand. And I was looking at the consumer food culture, how snacks without any branding, it's just an amorphous blob. And also the purchasing aspect of it is a commentary kind of on art buying and who's allowed to buy art, who's even available to buy art. And this was in the same show. So the viewers had a decision to buy the capsule on the left or the right. The one on the left said it had French soil. The one on the right had American soil. This was right after I did a residency in France, and I was thinking about this idea that a travel destination like Paris is so magical, and if you had something from that location, you would become like a little bit magical yourself. And by the end of the show, the ones on the soil from Paris was actually bought a little bit more than the American soil, which was interesting. Since the shutdown, I was invited to be in this show. It's a virtual show. It's going to eventually be documented on Google Street View. So I made these dropped pins that were physical and installed in the landscape. And you can see my social media on the next page where I'll show when that is published. And my most recent project is this web page. It is designed to look like a desktop, and you can explore and look inside folders, and it's just like a bunch of collections of images that I've gathered. There's a little store hidden inside, and you can find some art objects that I have for sale. And that's the end of my presentation. If anyone has any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Ella.
Thank you.
Does anyone in the audience have any questions for Ella? Ella, while we await questions, where are you living and working right now? And I apologize if I missed it in your introduction.
Oh, no, it's fine. I live in Ohio now. I'm in Kent, which is kind of near Cleveland. It's near Kent State. And I can put the link to my website in the chat so people can see my new site.
Great, thank you. There is a question, Ella, how much were you selling the items in the machine for?
Oh, the ones in the vending machine were $2 each, and then the coin operated machine was $0.25.
Shockley is questioning if You are familiar with the literary work of Shelley Jackson. Her literary work plays with digital space and such. The last piece reminds me of her work.
Oh, cool. I'm not familiar, but I'll definitely write that name down and look it up. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ella. We will move on to the next presenter. David Ross is a third-year BFA student at the Cleveland Institute of Art in Cleveland, Ohio. David, go ahead.
Right. One moment. So hello, I'm David. Like Angie said, I'm a third-year student at the Cleveland Institute of Art, and today I will briefly share some documentation of my work, and talk a little bit about my practice as well. So I'm interested in the idea of representing materials as changing in terms of ascribed use and situational familiarity. I'm fond of installing various technological media within somewhat, I guess, agrarian constructions. In a lot of my work, I sort of like to imagine. Oh, sorry, this wasn't playing. I'll just go ahead here. In a lot of my work, I like to sort of imagine like an evolution of constructing and construction materials, and in this evolution of assigning certain materials to certain applications. I like to create these sort of medial snapshots within that evolution that sometimes result in sort of absurd or fallible results. The use of regional materials is important in my work, though I sort of detest the term Rust Belt and its implications as an artist in Cleveland. But this was made with Berea sandstone as a prominent piece. So in a lot of my practice, throughout, I've been very fond of creating cement objects along those lines of medial evolution. And these tend to be sort of representative of fossils or artifacts, depending on how they're situated. And one thing about working with cement that I like a lot is how it sort of softens the edge, so to speak. These casts sort of end up representing like ghosts of themselves. And I think that that's like a quality inherent to cement that's sort of dreamlike. Another thing I've been focusing on is sort of merging object and action, just because I think to me it seems strange to remain like completely object-based when the world is changing so dramatically and so quickly. But it's an idea I'm currently playing with. So here are some documentation shots of some media installations. I find that making work along these lines removes a lot of the pressure and finality of making these like bulkier, intricate sculptures. Work with installed media is a lot easier to be sort of augmented or repaired if need be. Each decision doesn't have the same consequences as, stacking rocks or pouring cement or something like that. I think there's also a lot of cool things that can happen when you sort of blur the edges of materiality. So in this piece, they call it a river in space, made with fiberglass roving as a screen. And I'm really interested in this idea of creating a volume of moving light in space. The idea of making the field of vision sort of material while attempting to remove the screen. And I like to create these cement paintings, as I call them, as a sort of material testing, just to see how polished a representation of cement I can get. See how many of those like strange qualities I can unlock through processing. And again, I'm just really intrigued by sort of the softness of cement when processed to this extent. I think there's a lot of depth to it, and it's one of those things that can be overlooked. I'd also like to share some works in process, just stuff that's been on my mind. So during quarantine, I began to grow indigo for dyeing lumber. On the right here, I have some quote unquote lavender oak. It's just red oak with this natural indigo dye, and some really cool, weird effects. And this, I don't know, it was just a really rewarding process. These are some more pieces that are sort of playing with that idea of, you know, surface ambiguity and liminal materiality. And then finally here I have a snapshot of some video work in progress, looking at the life cycles of various materials as they relate to global commerce and shipping. There's a link to my website as well. And I just want to thank you all very much for taking the time to consider my work.
Great, David, thank you so much. If anyone has any questions for David, please drop them in the chat or Q&A right now. David, I'm curious, just because we don't have any questions quite yet, because I'm not from the region. I went to school at Edinburgh, but I'm curious why you detest the phrase or term Rust Belt.
Sure, it's sort of like, I don't know, at least around here, it's like Rust Belt is a style of hardware that you could like buy at Home Depot, you know, and it's just like one of those things that's very, the idea has been like very much abstracted and sort of easy to create. I don't know, it's just not, I think that there are more interesting things going on, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I also think it aligns with the way that you describe your work with like liminal materials, and even though you're using these historically traditional sculptural materials, right? Like I think conceptually you're expanding that dialogue quite a bit. Mm. One question, and then one additional question, then we'll move on. David, can you expand on your interest in surface ambiguity? And I believe that comes from Lisa Austin.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I just think that there's a lot there. It's like that same idea of like medial evolution, like making something and then addressing it as like a snapshot in some history of object making that sort of went wrong. It's like this isn't serving the purpose that it ultimately like should end up serving, if that makes sense. But it sort of exists as like a misnomer, so to speak. I don't know, I just think there's a lot there, so it's something I like to play with.
All right, great. Thank you so much for the question, Lisa. Thank you, David. Last but not least, we will move on to Caitlin Sweetland, who is a BFA graduate from Slippery Rock University. Caitlin, go ahead to conclude our presentations for the day.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Angie. Let me share my screen. Let's see. All right. It's lagging a little bit. Okay, hello everybody. My name is Caitlin Sweetland, and I graduated from Slippery Rock University with a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree and a special education certification. I'm currently student teaching through Carlow University. Today I wanted to talk about my body of work, duality, and the works leading up to it. I wanted to touch on research within materials and the process behind duality. So this sculpture was created in 2018, and the foundation of the sculpture is a tree stump. I wanted to use it as an opportunity to explore like earlier two-dimensional works in a three-dimensional way. And I also wanted to use it as an opportunity to explore materials like paper mache and plaster. So this piece was a significant stepping stone in the larger body of work that you'll see later on. Elements such as the stairs that later became bridges and the trees proved to be significant and reappear in my later works. The approach to the island would only get pushed further. So in this series of images, I was researching colors and materials and how they can bring out emotions and appeal to sensory exploration, particularly with touch. I knew I wanted to use these colors to represent different emotions, but also possibly different stages of life. So I got these photos onto fabric by ironing on image transfer paper with the images printed on. I tried out different combination of dyes and bleach on the surface, and I was attempting to suggest like a hazy memory. I wanted to take this effect further by selecting houses with the same color scheme as the fabric. So another large part of this project was my exploration with the textures for the undersides of the islands. I knew I wanted to take close-up shots, and I wanted to spend a lot of time searching for like the most interesting textures I could find in nature. Some of them were man-made. So I used the heat gun to create a weathered look on the houses in the islands. Besides the houses, a very important element was the bridges. They were implied, but they symbolized a connection between these emotions, whether it be good or bad. And I knew I wanted to approach this concept again. So I approached this concept again with a combination of 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional. This was an earlier edition of the duality sculptures, and it was an opportunity to try new materials like plexiglass. There was lots of connection with the bridges, and they were broken. But yeah, it was interesting because I was trying to construct the houses in a way that like I imagined it. So between that sculpture and the one made during my senior show, or for my senior show, there was a dramatic shift in the appearance of the trees. But something that traditionally represented life became a symbol of disease in this body of work, and the houses disappeared. Yeah. Okay, so the pieces made for duality followed a similar process to the sculptures from the previous semesters. The sculptures had styrofoam at the core and wood stained paper mache and alpaca wool on top of the pieces. And though the plaster gave me the texture I wanted, it chipped too much and it was too heavy. So the trees were actual tree branches with wire attached, and then they were covered with tissue paper and draped with embroidery floss. And originally the sculpture stood on like 4 to 5 plexiglass legs on a plexiglass base, but it proved to be too fragile and too unstable. So with the advice and help from Tom Como and Sean McMillan, I constructed, they're my professors at Slippery Rock, I constructed wooden frames to hold the sculptures, and almost all the issues encountered with the plexiglass disappeared. The waterfall look I was after also disappeared, but I'm still really happy with the end result. And I can also rearrange the sculptures in like whatever way I want, so that's cool. But I opted for a muted color scheme with the sculptures for the most part. They were more toned down from my earlier works, and the wall tapestry was created at a separate time apart from the sculptures, like in quarantine. And I found myself drawn to a more vibrant color scheme. So I put my own meaning into these works, and I've studied them a lot to understand like more about myself. But I began approaching this subject matter in 2018. I can see how much I've grown since then, and my work has definitely changed. Yeah. So I encourage you guys to look at my work and decide for yourselves. If you see these pieces differently since the beginning of this presentation, and if you guys see anything significant in my work that can relate to your own lives, and I look at these and discover new meanings and symbols like every time. But that's pretty much it. Thank you for your time. Back to you, Angie.
Great, thank you so much, Caitlin. Are there any questions from the audience for Caitlin before we open it up to questions for all of the panelists? There are a couple of questions for, okay, here we go. There's one. Caitlin, these seem surreal in some way. Didn't you study surrealists?
I don't think I really studied surrealist artists. I was mostly just looking at like nature and trying to figure out like how to, you know, make that, you know, like recreate that, but in like my own way, like the way my brain perceives nature, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think subconsciously too, that's a very surrealist sort of approach that you have, Caitlin.
Definitely. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. One additional question, Caitlin, does your work relate to your special education work?
You know, I'm not sure about that. I would have to really think about that and like, you know, I don't know. Maybe I think it could have a lot to do with like art therapy because that's something I'm really interested in. And like my art has been something that's been very therapeutic to me and it's helped me like understand a lot about myself and like things that I didn't fully understand about myself until I began like this series of works. So kind of in a way, I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting question and definitely a thoughtful response, tying the two together. Sage, I want to circle back around to you. First of all, thank you so much for starting all of the presentations. I think people were a little shy to ask any questions. I know I have one for you, but it looks like an additional question just came up, which is, did your audience get the Crown reference?
I'm assuming that means the audience in the village, or does that mean the audience right now?
How about
I'm not
the
sure.
village?
But I'll answer both. I guess so. In the community I was in, they actually have crowned Saint Lady Fatima as the Queen of Portugal. So for them, it's a very acknowledged. The striations are very familiar to the locals. And I created the bench because I noticed in that community, all of the elderly spent every night at benches, just sitting and talking. That was their routine. And I wanted to make sure that they still had something familiar to them. I hope that answers the question.
Mm-hmm. I think so. My question for you, Sage, I was curious about, first of all, it's so interesting to see the transition in your work with a response to just the pandemic and being in quarantine. And I know a few of the other artists also talked about the work that they've had to make as a sort of like shift or removal from studio, but your work in particular, I think is so interesting because you transition from these like extremely large, heavy, traditional sculptures that are made out of steel and are so dependent on materiality and facilities to a series of works that are so temporal and soft and impermanent. And I'm just curious, if you have any like thoughts or comments about that transition in work, both with like materiality and like impermanence, I guess, and then like also responding to materials that you have in your immediate environment.
No, that's a wonderful question. It's a question I could probably spend a lot of time talking about. But yes, I mean, being a welder for 6 years, I work large scale, work with the permanence of material. And I think for me, I'm realizing this past year, having OCD, how much that really has to do with it as well. So in my craft and learning the trades, I get very extreme and perfectionist about fabrication. So the large scale welding that I have is very much hide my welds, hide my lines, like clean cut. And so I've missed out on play. And now that I'm getting my master's at MICA for teaching, I'm trying to understand how important that play is again. And for the students that I know are at home and don't, have access to, like for me, not having access to a studio, I think, instead of trying to find access to a studio desperately, like accepting it and finding things at home. And also it's such a digital world that like, I have to like squish and play with them because I'm on Zoom all day for online classes, which means then editing those photos is more online time and like more just all virtual. So at least I have that moment where I can like play before I have to edit the photos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That element of play is so important. And I haven't talked about my work at all, but Sage, I think your work and mine aligns quite a bit. So we should continue this conversation post Sculpture X. I think that pretty much concludes it, unless there are any additional questions that I may have missed from the audience. We have just like 4 more minutes, so not a lot of time here. I don't, let me just check the Q&A one last time. There's one question for you, Abby. Did or will your ideas and plans regarding the pieces to be worn under the eyes change with the advent of mask wearing? It's a good question as it pertains to the pandemic.
Yes. So I think for me, it's tempting just to like go full out with the masks. I don't really want like this kind of idea that I have is like definitely a long one because I'm really not sure why I do it yet. So I don't really want to fully partake in like a trend that will like, I know it'll be forever, but it is a trend. So I do want to do like one piece that's like mask, just kind of like scratch that itch. But I think like I don't want my entire collection of work just to be pandemic work. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a definite considerate response in regards to the trend right now. All right, I think that concludes it. I really appreciate all of you sharing your work with us today. These were fantastic presentations and you all are making such wonderful, strong work, and you had very insightful things to share about your practice. So thank you so much. And to all the audience members, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for all of the insightful questions that were asked. I encourage you all to join in the next event this evening between 5:30 and 7:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is in regards to Mildred's Lane. The Tom Como and Mary Elizabeth Meyer with J. Morgan Hewitt will discuss Mildred's Lane at 5:30 this evening. That's all I have for you. Lisa, unless there are any final remarks or conclusions for this seminar.
Bye, everybody.
Great. Thank you so much. Bye.